Hi, everyone. It's Alyssa Sangster. I'm the CEO of Forté, and welcome to our Log In and Level Up series. Don't quarantine your career. That's the important thing here. So what we want to talk about today is now what? When your career plans aren't finalized, what's the next step? And we have some experts that we've gathered from many of our partner schools that are going to talk to you about that. And Michelle Lederhose, our Director of Undergraduate Programs here at Forté, is going to lead that discussion. And so I want to go ahead and pass the torch over to Michelle now, who will be your trusted guide for the next hour. Thanks, Michelle.
Great, thanks Alyssa. Welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here with our fantastic undergraduate partner panelists who are going to lead us through a really fantastic conversation. As Alyssa shared, my name is Michelle Lederhose. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Programs here at Forté. My background's in undergrad career services and advising before joining Forté. So I've coached many business students even during the crisis of 2008. So we hear you, we empathize with you, we empathize with the undergrads, with the professionals, everyone during this crazy time. So Forté's been in touch with career services from our university partners, recruiters from our corporate partners, active and following the thought leadership from many of our colleagues from NACE, College Recruiter, and more. And you know, we're all in it together. The reality and the unpredictability is nerve-wracking. But we can get through this, and you're going to come out on top if you leverage your resources and time well. So I'm thrilled to moderate this conversation with hopes that you walk away from this discussion running to your career services office, virtually of course, and having some direction when asking yourself or your parents asking you, now what? So we're lucky to be joined by this great group of experts. These are the folks working with you and your peers to ensure a smooth transition to your online internship experience, offer resources for you to continue your internship or job search. They have relationships with valuable networks for you to leverage, and they can motivate you and your peers to truly put your best foot forward during these crazy times. They are your career services leaders. So I'm going to let each of them take a minute to introduce themselves. And we have a few questions lined up for them to discuss that we anticipate might be top of mind to you all on the call today. But we really do want to leverage the question and answer box that you'll see on your screen there. So you'll see a Q&A. If you have questions that pop up relevant to the topic today, please jot them in there and we will do our best to get to all of your questions. So please come through and use that Q&A box. If you want to say hi to everyone, all the panelists and attendees, you'll also see that there is a chat box that you can use. So if you want to just say your school and your class year, welcome. And if you want to say your major or area of interest, you're welcome to use the chat box for that, but really try to keep your Q&As into that Q&A box. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our panelists. I will start at the top of my screen here. I see Rebecca. Do you want to say hello?
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Cook. I am the Executive Director of Undergraduate Career Services at the Kelley School of Business, Indiana University. My background, actually investment management, which has nothing to do with this job, but I'm an MBA from Kelley and then worked in investment management for about 14 years and came back to Kelley almost 10 years ago. Worked in graduate career services, then ran the full-time MBA program, and now in July moved to the undergrad side. So I'm excited to chat with you all.
Great, thank you. Rachel?
Hi all, my name is Rachel Atello. I am the Director of Career Planning and Resources at Scripps College in Claremont, California, about 45 minutes northeast of LA. We're one of the 5 Claremont Consortium schools, so Claremont McKenna, Herbie Mudd, Pitzer, Pomona, and Scripps. I've been at Scripps College just about 6 years now. My background is actually in, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, but worked in higher ed a lifetime ago and then found my way back after doing my graduate training. Really have a passion for counseling and supporting students as they try to figure out what it is they want to do post-grad, and our alumni as well. And change and chaos makes that even more interesting. So excited to be here today and have some conversations about what now.
Fantastic, thanks. Lindsay?
Unmute. I am Lindsay Granger Weaver, Associate Director at Beyond Barnard at Barnard College. Beyond Barnard is pretty much the future-focused advising office, and so we do career advising for students and alumni, also graduate and professional school advising, fellowships, on-campus employment, externships, kind of we run the gamut, we do it all. I've been at Barnard College for about a year, but I've been doing future-focused work in career development in a variety of public and private 2-year and 4-year schools for about 10 years now. The doctorate from NYU in ed leadership, and I focus a lot on career readiness, especially how career relates to identity. And so I love what I do. I'm really excited to share everything with you guys, and hopefully this can calm some nerves a little bit, because my students are anxious and I'm sure everyone else is too.
Great. Chris, you want to say hello?
Sure. And Lindsay, I don't think they're the only ones who are anxious. I think we're anxious also, right? So this will be great for all of us. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Meaner. I am the Director of Career Development for the College of Business Administration at the University of Pittsburgh. I have a really interesting background that I'm really excited to share with you about. Been at the University of Pittsburgh in this role now for about a year. It's been a really tumultuous year. So it's been a great learning experience. Previously, before the University of Pittsburgh, I worked at a very large healthcare organization in the city of Pittsburgh, and I started their recruitment programs, their campus recruitment programs. So I come with this really interesting background from the employer side, where I understand what the internship program looks like, what recruitment looks like, some of the science that goes into recruitment, and I also have this really interesting higher education background. I've been serving in the higher education outside of that last job for about 15 years. So many different jobs at the University of Pittsburgh. So really excited to share with you all today and also to learn with all of you. So thanks for having me, Michelle.
That's great. That's great. What a great diverse group of panelists we have here, coaching many different students in different backgrounds, class years, majors. So there's definitely something for everyone on this call. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. So just again, welcoming all the attendees that are here today. If you want to use the chat box to introduce yourself, just your name, school, and your class year, that's great. And then please make sure you post any Q&A questions that we can answer in the Q&A box, and we'll be moderating that throughout the panel as well. But let's get started. So as we introduced at the top of the call, these are really challenging times. There's many students still seeking an internship or a summer experience. So what are some creative ways that you're recommending your students to pivot their traditional search and source for summer opportunities? Rebecca, I can start with you if you want to reflect on that.
Sure. I think the one important thing to remember is if you read all the headlines, there's nobody hiring. But in reality, there actually are companies that are hiring. And you want to look in specific industries that are growing in this time of strife. But these would be logistics companies, online retail companies, your Amazons, your Walmarts. A lot of your healthcare companies are growing, some of your tech companies. So I think the key here is to be open and flexible with your job search. It may not be the time, and probably isn't the time, to have your dream job out there, or your I only can live in X city. I would be as flexible as possible in terms of location and industry, and really focus on how you can develop those skill sets that you're looking for. If you can't find something official, that's totally okay. The world is going through this all at the same time, and everybody's going to remember exactly what happened in the summer of 2020. So I'd say try to find something official, but otherwise look around you and look at all the companies that are closed down or basically closed down, and maybe reach out and volunteer for some of them. There's a lot of small businesses that are wanting to come back and wanting to restart. So offering your skill sets, offering to help in all sorts of different ways, probably it'd be great experience, but also really valuable for those companies. So I think looking around you and trying to say, okay, how can I utilize the skill sets that I've gained so far in school, or even if you're looking for a full-time job.
Yeah, Rebecca, I think that's great. And something else that I'd like to just throw in there also to the group is we are, as career development professionals, waiting for you to come and find us. We want you to set up virtual appointments with us because we have some things in our back pocket that might serve you over the summer. So for example, at the University of Pittsburgh, we just launched what we're calling a micro internship program, where we're working with our faculty to produce student research projects, as well as working with some of the local nonprofits who can't afford to bring on interns traditionally. And we have a paid internship program for students to join those, and we have open positions. So I guarantee you that's happening at each of your career development offices. So I would urge you to really engage with them, especially since we're all in the same boat. We're sitting at home and we just want you to come and find us. So please, please, please utilize your career development office.
I can chime in too. I think one of the things that keeps coming up as we hear from students and meet with students is, what do I do with some of this downtime as I continue my job or internship search? But if it's not happening, what can I do? We've talked a lot about some of the continuous learning pieces that you can do. Now, I'll be quick to say, and we'll talk about this a little bit further too, you have to balance that with your own self-care, because it can feel overwhelming to just be like, okay, go sign up for all these classes when it is an internship or a job that maybe you really want. But I think keeping that in your back mind, in your back pocket, I'm mixing my metaphors, in terms of what are the skills that I've always wanted to hone for that job that I really want. And you now have this, if I reframe it, a gift of time in that you could use to see some of those online platforms like LinkedIn Learning. There are a lot of free resources out there. So if you're like, I've just never been able to hone Excel like I'd like to, you might have pockets of time that you can pepper in to do just that. And that's a good way to be able to fit that into the storytelling once an employer for a job or an internship does ask you, what have you been doing with your downtime in COVID? Because we can guarantee that's going to be a question that comes up in these future interviews.
And I think to kind of piggyback on that, I think it'd be a great time too to start to look at skills, but also look at industries that you may never have considered before, seeing where your skills could transfer, but also just trying something new. If it is a summer internship, as opposed to maybe a full-time opportunity. So you can have that shorter window of time to just test it out and see. And so you can either check a box that like, no, I know, in fact, I don't want to do this. Or it can be something where you're like, oh, this just open up a new realm of possibility for your career path. So really taking the time to explore what's out there and just take a chance on something, because the worst can happen. It'll be a short-term time that's not so great. Long-term is that it could end up being like a really great career option for you.
Some great points, and I know we'll talk more about sourcing internships throughout this conversation. There are many students who are learning right now that their internships and full-time experiences will be virtual, or perhaps just start virtual and then hopefully move to live. So I know virtual online learning is happening for the most part, and it could be a great prep for what's about to happen for them this summer. But what are some ways that these students listening in can prepare for a virtual internship experience? And especially, how do you recommend they can make the most of an internship virtually? So much is around evaluating culture and to see if it is a good fit before you sign the dotted line to secure that full-time slot. Rachel, I'll start with you if you have any tips here.
Yeah, happy to, Michelle. So again, without a doubt, I just want to underscore, it's a strange way to onboard. So let's just call that what it is. If you have an internship lined up and you were planning to be there in person and that's pivoting, or if you're now searching for online opportunities, so just to say that, but just remembering that we, the employers, are all in that with you as well. So I think leaning into the awkward, I tell students when they're doing phone or online interviews, like, it's just going to be awkward. And I think if we own that, then it helps everybody kind of move through that together. So I think starting there, realizing that we're all human, we'll figure it out, but having a modicum of grace or benefit of the doubt and kind of extending best intentions. I've had some students who are really frustrated, understandably, by that process, and some employers who likewise are saying, we don't know yet what's going to happen. So I think just recognizing we all need to pivot together. And so I think that's one area where if you lead with that and you're able to show some initiative and say, you know, I see this gap, how can I help? I think that's always important to stand out to an employer, but even more so now to have an intern or an employee who will say, hey, I see something that needs to be done. Do you mind if I take a crack at that? In general, I mean, I think the advice I would give, Michelle, isn't all that different than I would give if you were doing this in person, which would be to lead with listening and trying to understand who the players are and what interactions are going on. Now, the challenging piece of that is you're not getting that just walking by desks and in the lunchroom or at the water cooler. So I think being proactive in that, let's say you do have an internship set up, talking with your supervisor about, is it possible for me to maybe join some meetings that I otherwise wouldn't be in just so that I can learn. Those are ways that you can kind of see both how colleagues treat each other up and down the food chain, so to speak. I think that's really important when you're evaluating culture. And I guess the other piece, circling back on what I said earlier about extending a lot of grace to everyone in this process, still take it as information. The way they're communicating with you now or not is information about the company culture. And I'm always fond of telling students, you really want to trust your gut and keep your radar up when it comes to how do I fit in an organization. And so I think that's what I would say in terms of how to do this virtually. I mean, it's going to be weird and awkward. Lean into that, advocate for yourself, take initiative. And then I think really having to kind of create your own small interactions, because those aren't going to happen as naturally as they would if you were in person. I'll pause there and see what my other panelists have to add to that.
Yeah, I agree, Rachel. What the trend that I've been seeing from our partners that we are working with very closely is that they're truncating the internship experience to a 4 or 5 week experience and giving offers for next year. And I found myself thinking today, even though I knew that this question was coming up, how in the world would I decide if that's a good fit for me, right? And I think that's going to be something that a lot of people are going to try to figure out. And some of the things that came up in my mind were, sure, working with your supervisor is number one, right? You got to work with that supervisor. You got to put yourself out there just as you would if you were in person. I started thinking about professional groups and some of the larger organizations and making sure you're putting yourself into some of those affinity groups that the larger organizations have. Maybe it's a women's leadership group. Maybe it's a Gen X or Gen X, whatever this generation is called, group that they might have at the organization, just so that you're meeting more people who are similar in a peer group to you. The other thing that I thought would be really interesting is, and I know this, I'm going to sound like a broken record with this, your career development office may have a list of alumni that works at that organization that you can start networking with. So you can talk to them, find out who the alumni are, get connected with them, and they might be able to help you navigate the organization so that you can determine if it's a good fit for you. So those were some of the things that I started thinking about this morning, because I was like, man, that would be a really tough decision to make a decision without actually working there if that's going to be a good fit for me.
I'd like to piggyback on what Chris just mentioned too. It's the networking piece and getting to know, and especially when you go in, understanding the team structure, understanding the organizational structure. You know, obviously you have a supervisor, but who else do you play with? Who else is involved in decision making? And really going out of your way to set up calls, video chats with those people. You would be doing it normally in real time. I mean, in this, you know, in a real world situation. So this time would be just going out of your way to spend the time to schedule those calls and to meet those people. And again, the more people you get to know, you're going to understand a culture, and you're going to be able to figure out, do I like the general vibe of this place or not? It is different, but again, you can get an idea. You also might be able to get some companies to do virtual tours. I've talked to some companies that are doing that for their students if they can't come in at the end of the summer, but somehow setting up a virtual tour so you get an understanding of what it looks like and what it kind of virtually feels like.
It may also be good to keep in mind that you may not be able to make the decision with complete information because you may not get it until hover months later when you walk through the doors. And so being comfortable with making decisions based on limited information is really something to start with now. It's kind of forcing a lot of people go down that road anyway, but it'll be useful in terms of just like you won't beat yourself up over it later if you go in there and think that everyone's great via Zoom and then you meet them in person and it's awful. Because that may be the case. That may be what happens. We just have to be kind of okay with where things are right now and know that you can always make a change. Your first job is typically no one's last job. And so just using it as a building block, using it as kind of like career stepping stone, if you have to, start a job without knowing or accept an offer without really getting an in-person feel for it, that's totally fine, because you can then come back to your career services office, because often I know we have lifetime alumni support. I know a lot of places also do. And so it's one of those things where like, we're there for a reason. And so if a year, 2 years, 6 months, you're like, this is not for me, then we can help you figure out what to do with that and figure out how to use the skill set that you've already built in that short amount of time to get somewhere else. So it's not the end of the world. It's just being okay with that, decision that you'll have to make.
Great, all great feedback, thank you. And so I know unfortunately for some of our students the reality is that their internship offer or full-time offer has been rescinded. So we feel so much for those organizations making those difficult decisions, of course, but of course the students are really impacted. And this actually goes in with a couple questions I'm seeing come through on the Q&A. Many of these students will restart a search, right? So what can these students do? How can they look for internship opportunities in addition to career development resources that the school offers? So LinkedIn, Handshake was mentioned. Somebody asked about finding remote internship opportunities. So that's kind of one question. So really, how else can they restart their search perhaps? And then another question is, what is some advice you can give for these students who are not able to secure a traditional opportunity this summer or full-time job right after graduation? We talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the call, but how can they use their time wisely in the interim? Chris, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I'll start off by saying that I was on a phone call this morning with a national large retailer. I was talking to them about, they just made a really tough decision to pull all of their internships for the summer. And, I talked to them from the perspective of an employer and how incredibly difficult that decision had to be. They just spent an entire year recruiting that class of interns just to lose them. So when I was talking to this woman, she talked to me about how there were tears on both sides of the conversation because somebody had just had an internship rescinded and they had to do that phone call. So I think that we're in this really interesting area where the first thing that I would do if I had a rescinded offer is to reach out to the company that rescinded my offer and keep conversation going with them. Because you don't know where that conversation can lead you. So I think that's a really interesting tactic that I would take, is making sure that communication is still happening. In terms of where else you try to source internships, I hate to say it again, but it's this big N word of networking, right? You don't necessarily have to use the services of your career development office, especially if you've exhausted those services. That's where it's time to turn to your personal network. Who in your personal space can help you find an opportunity that's in your hometown area? Maybe somebody who knows somebody who can help you with a company that you haven't even thought of that's in your hometown area. It's amazing the familial connections that we have once we really start thinking about them, and then also utilizing those alumni in your hometown area. In terms of what happens if you can't find an internship, because employers also know that not everybody can find an internship. So one of the big questions I've been asked by students is, they all, during the fall recruitment cycle, they're always asking what you did over the summer and what you learned from your internship. Well, guess what? They're going to ask you what you did with your time instead of what you learned on your internship. So this is the time, and I think Rachel mentioned this, is where you really start to think about what kinds of skills do you want to enhance while you have this time, right? So one of the things that I talk to students about is start looking up some job descriptions of some really cool jobs that you're interested in. Maybe it's a stretch job. Maybe it's a job that isn't for a first-time grad, but it's a job that's like for somebody with 2 to 3 years of experience. Just look at a whole bunch of different job descriptions that interest you, and I would start jotting down some of the skills that they mentioned, some of the competencies and some of the skills that are in those job descriptions. And I would start looking for ways to fill in the gaps for those skills. So Excel. Maybe you're intermediate Excel, right? And this is your opportunity to go to advanced Excel. Maybe you really love analytics, so you start thinking about MySQL or R or Python. Maybe you're really into a specific company, so you start listening to their post-earning calls, right? That's something that people don't really think about, but there's all kinds of different things that you can do to fill in those gaps and to enhance yourself. At our university, LinkedIn Learning is part of the student tuition, so everybody has free access to LinkedIn Learning. If that's not an option where you're at, look at MOOCs. Look at what your community college is doing. Look at and think about maybe some less expensive ways to take classes. There's all kinds of ways to really start gaining those skills to fill in some of those gaps. And I'll turn it over to the rest of the panelists.
Chris, I love those tips, and especially about the keep the conversation going. I see that there was a question in the Q&A about what exactly we mean by that. I'll take a stab at that, and then Chris, if you want to answer it too, or anyone else. I think, again, we're just remembering that there's a human on the other end of the rescinded offer. And I think it can be easy to be like the big bad organization did this, in that you, well, yes, again, validating, let's be clear, it sucks. That's not something you wanted to happen, they wanted to happen. And so I'm not trying to say, it's no big deal. But reaching out and showing some kindness and professionalism in the way you try to understand that. So saying, I'm heartbroken over it. I'm really bummed. I would love to learn more about what the organization thinks moving forward. If there's a time that we could revisit this to talk about opportunities in the future. So I think just coming at it from I want to learn more. And I understand it must have been a difficult decision for you as well, can go a long way, because to Chris's point, those aren't decisions that an organization makes lightly, but it does. I mean, it sucks for everybody involved. The other thing I would say, just in terms of like concrete resources, there are a number of search platforms where you can search by remote filter or virtual internship. I know LinkedIn, Idealist, even Handshake, for those schools that use Handshake, you can search. I think I don't know if it's virtual or remote, but one of those. So try seeing if you can do a filter on those searches, because that's just a good way to kind of cut through the noise and see what is available online. And Google's your friend in that way, just saying remote search, because there are articles coming out every day and listservs, absolutely. But I would just start checking those out, because that, again, will help you just see, and often by geography search as well, which is interesting now that we're doing it virtually. That might not be as big of a deal. And yet, if you're trying to plant seeds for where you want to land once the pandemic has evolved. So those are two notes that I would say.
Just to add in a little bit more on that, there's two other things I can think of. There's a company called Parker Dewey who offers micro internships, and so you might want to check out their website. And they partner with a lot of major organizations to do small to larger projects. So these could be 1 day to several weeks. So something to consider, to take a look at. And these are great ways that the companies, even in like normal times, would use to evaluate potential candidates. So again, it's something it's a good way to build skill sets. And then it's also a great time right now just to continue your informational interviewing and really spend time developing your knowledge of the space you want to go into. So whether that's a specific company or a specific industry, building on the skill sets that Chris mentioned, but also just as much as you can learn about that industry and that company, because that'll show immensely and help you really stand out when you interview in the fall.
And I think to kind of speak to a question that just came up in the Q&A about being productive, and if you don't have the means or the ability or even like physical ability as well to be productive, it may be just useful too to take some time, not have to do this all the time, knowing what we've said previously, that employers will understand that this is a summer that is not a normal summer. It's not something that you're going to get super dinged on for not having a name brand internship or something. It's really just a matter of doing what you can. And so one thing I've been advising students who either can't get or haven't been able to secure an internship, even remote, is to start to put things out there on your own. Depending on the industry, this could be something that is very appreciated to show that to kind of like show your work and show your worth sorts of projects. And so if you're into a creative field, or if it's something that you've been thinking about trying out, or to just show off that you can do something, having a personal portfolio site or something like that, kind of taking the time to be productive in a way that is not as taxing. And also in a way that may build towards what the economy may look like moving forward, where there are a lot more independent work, a lot more kind of like you put together your own career, because it's very unstable, and what stability will look like in the future may be a little different. What productivity in the future may be a little different. And so it could be a matter of you taking ownership of the summer, knowing whatever you do must be personally meaningful, because then you can spin it in any way possible, really, on your documents and in an interview.
I love some of these creative ideas that you're giving to the students to really think outside the box about how they're spending their time, and just leveraging the resources that are on campus. And I keep going back to career services, but I bet there's others on campus that are offered, that your college offers, whether it's for assessment right now to help hone in and identify some of those core skills that you've been thinking about. But I love some of these really creative ways, portfolios, the virtual resumes, just so many different ways you can differentiate yourself from other candidates and really maximize the time. And there's quite a few questions on this coming up from the chat box. So I want to make sure we get to those. But I have another question in mind around networking, and it's such a buzzword right now, and I feel like it's being used more than ever. And there's been a couple questions that have come through, but for some folks, they're just networking for the first time, and for others, they are veteran networkers and know how it works. But it's tricky right now. It's harder than ever, and for women especially, there's always that question of assertive versus aggressive, and I have to assume we're all more sensitive to that now, especially. So can you offer some tips to the students for appropriate and tactful networking during these times? One of the questions that was asked was, what kind of conversations should I even be having? And we've been hearing, anyone that's reached out to me, they've all started with, how are you? I hope you're well, and so maybe that's not as common as we would have seen just a couple months ago. So Rebecca, I'll let you start on that one.
Sure. I totally agree. And people are you safe and healthy? Or I hope you're safe and healthy. And yeah, in a normal time frame, I don't think we'd say that. But I think reaching out and respecting people's, respecting the time. And so, saying something like, I realize that we're in an unprecedented situation, or understanding the current situation. But if you hear of anything, these are some things I'm interested in doing. So just kind of addressing it, but then also letting people know as you reach out to them what you're looking for. And so maybe it's something in social media, or maybe just, or in finance or something. So I think it's just being willing to ask. And networking, most people don't like it. But the nice thing right now is everybody's at home. They're kind of stuck. So you can reach out to them, and chances are they're going to respond. We all need, I think, social interaction today. We're all tired from Zoom, but we do need that human element, and we're all missing that from our normal workplaces. So I think it is okay to reach out, and again, just recognizing this is the situation. I'm looking for some projects, or I'm trying to be creative. Do you have any ideas for me? And asking for advice. People are always willing to give advice, even in good times or now. So I think there's you can do it, and it's a good time to network. Also, going back to what I said on that informational interviewing, again, most people are happy to talk about their roles or their companies or whatever that question is. But do have a plan when you do this. Don't just say, hey, I'd like 20 minutes of your time. Be a little bit more specific. I'd like to ask you some questions about your role as a project manager and kind of how you got to that, or what advice do you have for me to get to this level? And so that way they know what they're getting into, and then they can respond.
I think another important thing right now with networking, and this kind of goes into a lot of the themes we've been touching on in this last 35 minutes or so, really has to do with asking people for resources. So seeing what sorts of resources they recommend you engage with in order to either get to know the industry more or get to know more of that specific job. And so what that can do is also give you something to do right now, which is like maybe reading something that you haven't ever seen before or something that you hadn't considered, but it also gives you an in to get back to them and to really circle back and say, wow, thank you so much for recommending this. I learned so much from this resource, or, sharing it out to either your LinkedIn group or to other folks and tagging them so that they see that you followed up with it. And so this makes it so that they feel like they've helped you out and maybe more willing to kind of do something in the future, shows that you took their time seriously, and is also sharing a resource for your peers. And so you can kind of start to connect other people to that person and to that information. And so it's great. People always ask, how do I follow up? And the best way is to build that into your questions with something like a resource or someone else to reach out to, and then circling back and saying thank you. So like little things that can make your networking more productive for both you and also the person who you're asking of.
That's great, thank you. I have another question, and then there's been a couple others that have come up on the chat, but I think this is really important, and it overlaps with one of the questions that's coming in the Q&A, but many of you work with diverse students, and likely some of these students on the webinar may have come from a diverse background to include women of color, LGBTQ, first gen, students with disabilities. Any particular advice that you're offering to those groups that you're working with that may fall into a diverse category? There was another question that came in here about, obviously the challenge for international students right now with CPT and OPT, who have an increased question around securing employment in these times. So if there's any resources to support these groups, we'd love to hear them. Lindsay, we can start with you if you have any.
Sure. So I think, again, big theme of this chat is networking, but I think really strategically networking. And so often it's more comfortable to network with people like you. And so people within specific affinity groups and specific identity groups. And while you should definitely start that and keep those going, finding allies outside of your group to network with, and also maybe within the industries or organizations that you're targeting, is a really great strategy, because it's hard anyway, if you are any sort of visible or invisible minority, to be on a job search. But in times like now, when employers have a lot more leeway and a lot more leverage to kind of be picky, they will be, and it may be a lot harder to break into certain organizations and certain opportunities. And if you don't have somebody on the inside who is advocating for you, or someone who can provide you with some strategies that may be more useful, that may be given to folks in different types of networks. So I think broadening the networking is one thing that won't be a waste of time at all. I think too, once things open back up, or even just starting to see kind of where things are going, once folks start hiring, really hold companies accountable to their stated diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates. Sometimes it was lip service anyway, but it may become even easier for them to not be fulfilled. And so look at the organizations that are following through on their commitments, following through on supporting their interns, supporting their employees. And then a couple other things, just again, like the independent projects piece, things that can show your worth, things that you can turn to that are tangible, that show off what you can do. And just use this time to really be nimble. Think about adjacent opportunities. So maybe if you got an internship rescinded, or your industry doesn't usually hire until right now, and now they're not hiring at all, look at organizations that would value your skill set and then try it out. The worst you can do is circle back in a few months and try again, but you'll try again with a lot more knowledge and also a lot more experience, and that's always a good thing. So I'll cut that off there. It's very similar to what we would tell other folks, but definitely gonna have to really master these things if your job search may be a little bit more challenging.
Lindsay, I appreciate that. And I feel like it does circle back to the initial question that Michelle posed about how do you sort culture and fit, and to be able to speak to people who have an experience at that organization is via an informational interview, and kind of setting up some time to say, hey, I see this on the website. I'm curious about your experience, your lived experience of this stated value, can be really valuable, just to kind of get that insider scoop.
Thank you. That's great. So here I'm looking at just a couple questions, but I think we have just another minute, and then I have one question for all the panelists before we go. But there's a couple common denominators that I'm seeing here. Obviously, everyone is understanding that this is a challenging economy, and you know, the full-time positions will be highly sought after, and maybe fewer opportunities for the students to fill. So there's a couple questions around graduate school as an alternative to going into the job market right now. There's another question, I think probably on the similar lines of, you know, should I be graduating early right now, because I won't have that, you know, summer experience, but I can graduate early. Is that a good idea or not? How can I maximize my time? So I don't know if anyone has any advice to share with those two specific questions. I guess the graduate school one is probably on top of, I saw there's quite a few seniors on the chat here.
Yeah. So I think I'd want to look at it and see if it's something you really want to do, and what are you going to gain out of it. So let's think of the purpose of graduate school. It's to gain further experience in a certain area. So if you are graduating now and you realize, okay, there's something I didn't take classes in college, and I want to really build up my skill sets there, then it probably would make sense. If you're using it to essentially hide, it's an expensive hide. So I'd be a little bit more hesitant there. Again, there are companies hiring. It's not like everything stopped. I mean, a lot of it did, but there are companies actually hiring, and I do think we are going to begin to see companies slowly opening up. I can't tell you exactly when, but it will begin to slowly begin, you'll see a slow increase there. So again, I'd go back and figure out what is the purpose of graduate school? Is it something you really want to do, or a skill set you really want to gain? If so, then it makes sense. But otherwise, I probably wouldn't do it. I don't know if anybody else wants to disagree with me.
I would echo that, Rebecca. I think my radar always go up, only because, and as somebody who has 2 masters, one of which I don't use at all in my current role, it's an expensive hide is a good way to put it. And I think it is, it's understandable, right? I think it's easy to say, oh, if I get more letters after my name, that's necessarily a good thing. I think I would circle back to do your research and talk to people in that field to say, do I need a master's or a PhD to help my job advancement or my pay so it's not an easy black and white answer. I would say COVID or not, it still requires a good deal of research. And it breaks my heart to see students come out with even more debt and then not necessarily have the payoff for graduate school that they thought. So I would say it is a decision not to make lightly, and do your research.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I will just say from Forté's perspective, for those of you that are looking at, Forté is quite a pipeline into the MBA programs, and something that we always want the women, especially these undergrads, to consider. And there's a lot that you can be doing now to prepare for your MBA down the road. And so please look at the Forté resources. They're really tailored to the women on this call, and leverage those resources to evaluate, what could you be doing now, so that if in a little bit you do want to apply, or there's some deferred admissions programs that are out there, that could be some great opportunities for the undergraduate students on the call today, including taking the GMAT, the GRE, or at least preparing for it. You possibly will never test better. So that's a great way to use your time. That's something that I always remind the undergraduate students that I'm working with. So with that, I just want to end, and we're definitely at the top of the call. So really quickly to, again, thank all of you so very much. And I'd just love for each of you to share how are you staying positive, and how are you staying motivated as career advisors, and coaching your students to do the same. It's a tricky time, but obviously your energy, your tips, your advice, you're a wealth of knowledge. You're so positive and so motivated to continue to see your students succeed. So would love for each of you to share a tip to wrap up the call.
I can go first. That's great. Thanks, Michelle. So I have been trying to take my own advice to students and looking at my own gaps and trying to fill in some things with some of our human resources trainings and our LinkedIn trainings and those types of things. So that's professionally. Personally, I've decided that there's no time better now than to get ready for that 10K. So I have started exercising and trying to get myself and my dog moving. So I'm trying to take care of myself professionally and personally. So thanks for asking that, Michelle.
Great, Chris. Good to hear.
I can pop in next. Similar to Chris, I start every morning taking my dogs for about a 45-minute walk. And it's good for them, it's good for me, and it's quiet, it's peaceful, I let my mind wander. It's kind of my own version of meditation, but it's amazing how many problems I've solved on that walk, just because something connects for whatever reason. So starting with that and taking care of yourself. If you need breaks, take breaks. If you need to get outside and breathe nice fresh air, do it. And then also I'd say try to or make sure there's an end to your day, whenever that is, an end to your, I'll call it a work day, and just stop and then decompress and read a book, watch TV, whatever that is for you, but really try to make it a delineated time frame.
Yeah, for me, it's been, as personal and professional is very blended right now, as I'm working from home and parenting an almost 2-year-old at the same time. And so there's really no breaks other than in the morning we don't have on Disney Plus, and in the afternoon we absolutely do. But I think just in terms of staying positive and optimistic, I think optimistic is a lot easier than positive sometimes. And so it's just really knowing that it's temporary. Whatever the next few months will look like, but I'm very much an achiever. And so it's been about changing up what work success looks like for me, what professional success looks like for me, and talking with students about that process too, I think has been helpful for them. And then, yeah, just personally, just maintaining, keeping kiddo happy and fed, and, not just eating Easy Mac all day. These are all just like small wins that make this process a lot more fun. I'll look back and laugh, but in the weeds right now, it's just more like laughing to keep from crying sometimes.
Or going between laughing and crying and back to laughing. I think I'm realizing I'm a little out of balance as I listen to my colleagues share what they're doing. One thing I try to do every morning is keep a gratitude journal and just jot some stuff down, even if it's that I'm writing with a red pen and it makes me happy, just because that's how I can focus my thoughts. But I'll be honest, I think part of it is just giving myself permission to learn what's not working. And so I saw some comments in the chat about how do we expect students to be productive, and realizing, gosh, I feel that sometimes too, because we're grieving and there's a lot of feelings happening. So I think exercise is important. I'm going to join you on that 10K training, Chris. and just, yeah, being maybe sometimes even seeing like, oh, wow, this didn't work. Let's shift my schedule a little bit so that I can get some balance.
That's great. Thank you all so very much. I heard some great themes here, and a lot was just around balance, leverage your resources, utilize your network. You know, for some folks, there was some folks jumping in there saying some things are a luxury to some, and you know, that is so true. So you have to, you know, just be where you are and take what you can out of all of this. I think too, the big theme here is, you know, you see these career services folks really have such great expertise in the space. Many of us have coached through, you know, crises before and are here for you and really want you to leverage the resources that you have. So there's some questions in here around rescinding offers right before. I'm nervous, I'm anxious. You know, you may not know how often your career services and your employers are connecting with each other. And so please make sure that you are touching base with them for how to have those conversations and share you appropriately your thoughts and feelings and anxiety. And or they maybe have answers for you on if what may be down the pike or from some internal conversations that they've had with the companies that they have relationships with. So please make sure you're going to them for tips and advice. So again, I want to thank you all so very much for your time. Thanks for the students that are on. This call was recorded and we will be sharing it out to our network, and we look forward to seeing you next week for a new topic. So thank you so very much. Thanks, everyone.